Today we dive into the unusual story of a young woman who was eager to develop a perfect plan while remaining undetected. This story takes place in Busan, one of the largest cities in South Korea, which is located on the southeastern coast. This young woman, who was obsessed with her ideas, was ready to do everything to realize them. Her strange behavior attracted public attention and became the topic of many discussions. Jong Yoo-jong, a 23-year-old resident of Busan, decided in May 2023 to realize her dream and began developing a perfect criminal plan. In the library, she borrowed books about how to hide evidence and studied criminology and police methods on the internet for 3 months. Jong Yoo-jong had no criminal past and was not connected with criminals. At first glance, she looked like an ordinary citizen. Therefore, she understood that her success would depend on choosing a target with whom she could not be connected. Where could one find such a person if not in a tutor search app? In South Korea, young people are under great pressure to succeed in school. Therefore, tutor apps have become very popular. These apps often offer many private teachers who advertise their services. For Jong Yoo-jong, it was the perfect place to find a mentor. Within a few days, she contacted over 50 tutors from Busan, presenting herself as a mother of a student who needs additional English lessons. After long conversations, she decided on a female tutor. The young woman was 26 years old, lived alone, and took students at her home. Acquaintances described her as a lively and kind-hearted person who sincerely cared for her students and wanted to help each of them unfold their potential. She could listen well and understand. Therefore, she probably suspected nothing unusual when Jong Yoo-jong asked her, "Do you live alone?" Perhaps the future student was simply shy and did not want someone else to hear her mistakes. The tutor confirmed that she lives alone and agreed to meet in 2 days for an introductory session. Her house was located in the Gyeomjong district, about 20 minutes' drive from the place where Jong Yoo-jong lived with her grandfather, her only guardian and relative. 26th of May 2023, around 4 o'clock in the afternoon, surveillance cameras recorded Yoo-jong walking to a teacher's apartment, dressed in a school uniform that she had ordered on the internet. She arrived at the apartment around 17:34. The teacher received her warmly at the door. If she had doubts about Yoo-jong's age, she had no time to express them. Yoo-jong immediately went into the apartment and after a brief exchange of courtesies asked to use the toilet. The apartment owner showed her where to go, but Yoo-jong used this opportunity to go into another room and check whether the woman really lives alone. 1 hour after the incident, Yoo-jong left the apartment wearing the teacher's clothes which she had taken from her wardrobe. In her new clothes, she went to several nearby supermarkets where surveillance cameras recorded her purchases: garbage bags, cleaning supplies, and other items. Later, she used these items for her purposes. It is not known why she did not take these things immediately. Perhaps she thought a police officer would stop her and search her bag. Or she hoped that the woman would already have these items in the apartment. Or she simply could not plan well. After Yoo-jong returned to the apartment, she immediately began thoroughly eliminating all traces of her presence. First, she took the mobile phone, the identification cards, and the wallet. Then she set about removing all evidence that could indicate her presence. She went home to get a suitcase and then returned to the crime scene to pack the tutor's clothing into 3 garbage bags. She threw these bags into the nearest garbage container. She hid the remaining evidence in the suitcase. The entire cleanup process took about 6 hours, during which she went back and forth between her house and the tutor's house 3 times. On the surveillance cameras, it could be seen how she calmly walked back and forth between the 2 locations without signs of unrest. Around midnight on the 27th of May, Yoo-jong left the apartment for the last time and took the suitcase with the evidence. She hailed a taxi and asked the driver to take her to Yangsan, which is 20 kilometers north of Busan. Yoo-jong loaded the heavy suitcase into the trunk herself and declined the driver's help. During the entire journey, she did not speak and avoided eye contact with the driver. When they arrived at a remote location by the river, Yoo-jong asked the driver to stop. paid him, and took out the suitcase herself before going into the forest. Yoo-jong's behavior seemed suspicious to the taxi driver, who goes to a river in the middle of the night with a heavy suitcase. Yoo-jong did not ask the driver to wait for her, but the taxi driver decided out of curiosity and intuition to drive around the area a little to see if she would return. After 15 to 20 minutes, he saw her returning with an obviously lighter suitcase. She hailed the taxi again and asked to be driven home where she lived with her grandfather. The authorities believe that Yoo-jong did not realize that the driver was the same man. The driver followed the instructions and tried not to consider the situation as strange. Later, however, following his intuition, he contacted the police around 3 o'clock in the morning. He reported that the young woman had possibly thrown something into the remote forest and gave her address. Thus, Yoo-jong's behavior that night was thoroughly analyzed. The investigators could understand her actions based on the taxi driver's information and pieced together all the facts. This helped with the further investigation. When the investigators arrived and began examining Yoo-jong's suitcase, they noticed strange dark red stains on it. When asked about the origin of the stains, the girl stated that she was at that time in her monthly cycle and suspected that the suitcase might have been accidentally soiled. However, the police doubted her explanation and took her to the local hospital. The tests revealed that Yoo-jong was not in this phase of her cycle, and the stains on the suitcase came from another reason. After that, Yoo-jong was asked again about the stains, and she invented a new story that these were connected to her pregnancy and a trip to the forest, hoping that this explanation would be more convincing. Meanwhile, other police officers searched the surroundings and found important evidence in the tall grass. The investigators brought Yoo-jong for questioning, but instead of demanding a lawyer, she invented another story. She said that she went to an English lesson to a tutor and found an unlocked door. When she entered, she saw traces of the crime on the floor, and an unknown man who was responsible for it was still there. He locked the door and said that she would be fine if she remained silent and helped him. Nobody believed her story, and Yoo-jong became nervous and changed her version of events again. Now she claimed that she had pretended to be a student because as an adult it was embarrassing for her to look for a tutor. When she came to the apartment, an argument arose about the learning program, and out of fear for her safety she acted, which led to the incident. After another fabricated story had exhausted the investigators' patience, they decided to contact Yoo-jong's grandfather and asked him to come to the station. The grandfather was very surprised and sad when he heard about his granddaughter's actions. He had raised her since childhood and could not believe that she was capable of such a thing. But when they showed him the evidence, he could no longer deny her guilt. Since the investigators could not get an honest confession from Yoo-jong, they asked the grandfather to speak with her alone. He agreed. When he entered the room, the grandfather began asking his granddaughter to tell him the truth. Perhaps Yoo-jong loved her grandfather, or she recognized that the situation was hopeless. But at that moment, she finally confessed. She explained that she was fascinated by everything related to real crimes, from movies and shows to books and articles. She wanted to experience what it was like to be involved in such a case. Her emotional report impressed even the most experienced investigators. After examining her story, her tutor and the surveillance camera footage from the day of the incident, the investigators were even more amazed. They had dealt with intentional crimes, but such a case had never encountered them before. It turned out that Yoo-jong was particularly interested in the Korean psychological thriller Helplessness, in which a woman commits a crime and assumes a foreign identity. Her browser history showed that she watched this movie daily. When the investigators compared her actions with the plot of the movie, they discovered obvious parallels. The thought of becoming someone else was attractive to her, considering her life before these events. After analyzing Yoo-jong's messages and social networks, it became clear that she had neither friends nor acquaintances, work or family, except for her grandfather. She led an inconspicuous life. In school, she was an ordinary girl with minimal social activity. But since then, something had changed. By chance or misfortune, Yoo-jong began to lead a withdrawn life and barely interact with other people, neither in the real world nor on the internet. Psychologists suspected that she was trying to escape from this situation both physically and emotionally. She dreamed of being someone else, someone who leads a fulfilling life, has their own apartment, a job, foreign language skills, and friends, someone like a tutor. Experts believe that her motive was not only curiosity but also envy. In her imagination, if she was already invisible, it seemed particularly easy to become someone else. During the investigation, the authorities contacted each of the 50 tutors with whom Chong O-chong communicated. All were young women, around 20. Yoo-jeon asked them whether they lived alone and whether her daughter could come to them for lessons. One young woman who urgently needed money was almost ready to take Yoo-jeon as a student, but finally decided against it because her apartment was too small for teaching. Now she and all the other tutors live with the thought that everything could have happened in their homes. That Yoo-jeon showed no remorse after implementing her strange fantasy was shocking. On the surveillance recordings made before and directly after the incident, she appeared remarkably calm and composed. Her movements were determined and confident, which impressed everyone who saw these recordings. It is difficult to understand how Yoo-jeon could go outside after what had happened and maintain so much self-control. When she was arrested, she had already prepared an apology for the press. In her statement, she said, "I feel sorry for the family, and I believe I was simply not myself." However, her words seemed insufficient to those who followed the case. Yoo-jeon's grandfather, who had raised her since childhood, moved to the center of journalists' interest. They began looking for him for interviews, and in one of these conversations he took full responsibility for her actions. He explained that his educational mistakes had led to this result. The grandfather also expressed deep regret toward the tutor's family. Everyone who knew him spoke of him as a friendly and caring person. He always tried to give his granddaughter everything necessary, and it was not easy to raise her alone. Neighbors often told of his kindness and generosity. Despite all his efforts, he now lives with guilt because of his granddaughter's actions. He could find no peace, as he realized that he had possibly made mistakes in Yoo-jeon's upbringing. He felt enormous responsibility for what had happened, and this feeling did not let him rest. The story of Yoo-jeon and her family triggered a broad public response. People discussed how such cases could have been prevented if other measures had been taken. Many felt sympathy for the grandfather, as they saw in him someone who had done everything he could, but still found himself in a difficult situation. Shortly before the court trial, Yoo-jeon underwent a PCLR test, which evaluates the ability for empathy, impulsivity, and tendency toward a parasitic lifestyle. This test comprises 20 questions and is evaluated on a scale of 40 points. In South Korea, those who achieve less than 25 points are considered people with serious psychological problems who have no conscience. Yoo-jeon scored 28 points. During the trial, she asked for forgiveness and claimed she had psychological difficulties at the time of the incident. But the prosecutors did not believe her words and declared that she had planned everything in advance and tried to cover up traces. They demanded harsh punishment, but Yoo-jeon escaped the harshest penalty. On the 24th of November 2023, she was sentenced to life imprisonment. Only a few knew that a taxi driver who followed his gut feeling alerted the police, which led to her arrest. Had it not been for his vigilance, Yoo-jeon might have escaped justice for a while and been able to work out a new plan. This taxi driver preferred to remain anonymous, avoided interviews and rewards, as he feared that Yoo-jeon might be released early and take revenge, or that her actions could inspire others. According to reports, Yoo-jeon feels quite comfortable in prison. She eats well, sleeps, and enjoys the isolation without showing signs of remorse. The South Korean media often highlight her appearance and emphasize that such a young woman could be involved in such a serious matter.